Have you ever actually thought you were about to die? I mean, properly stared death in the face. Now, I've had more than my fair share of travel disasters. Thefts, accidents, broken bones. In fact, a good many of them happened within a fairly short time frame, a phase I refer to as the 2-year karmic shitstorm. And I say karmic because it was one of those phases where it just felt like the universe was out to get me. Lots of bad stuff just kept happening and it was all completely out of my control. Or was it? Because the shit started happening literally within days of inviting Kyle back into my life. And if you don't know who Kyle was, you can check out my videos about being with a narcissist. The thing I didn't mention in those videos is that there was Kyle chapter 1 and chapter 2. Because that's the thing with narcissists. They're persistent. They love bomb you, they wear you down, and before you know it, you're saying, maybe they really have changed this time. So anyway, about a year after I left Kyle, he persuaded me to give him the proverbial one more chance. And like an idiot, I eventually caved. And he came to join me out in Asia, where I'd been based for several months. Now, a lot of what happened during that 2-year karmic shitstorm wasn't directly Kyle's fault. But it was incredibly weird the way all this stuff just started happening literally within days of me sending the email saying,
yeah, okay, let's try again.
I was in Melbourne at the time, staying with friends, and within 24 hours of hitting send, I began to feel really unwell, and it turned out to be tonsillitis and septicemia, but I didn't find out until a few weeks later when I was back in Thailand. Meanwhile, the friends I was staying with got burgled, so we temporarily moved to a different side of town where their car got totaled the first night we were there. It was just parked on the street and someone smashed into it. And a week later, I was leaving that house in the middle of the night because those same 2 housemates had gone completely off the rails. Fast forward a few days, I was back in Bangkok. A man got shot just a few feet away from me and I watched him die right there in a back street. It was all very surreal. So all this happened within just a few weeks of inviting Kyle back into my life. Coincidence? Maybe. Or perhaps there's some crazy woo-woo universal energy that we just don't understand yet. But those are stories for another day. The story I want to tell you today is about the bus crash. And then I'll tell you the story of the tuk-tuk of doom. Now, just to be clear, neither of these stories are supernatural, so they're not spooky in the traditional Halloween sense of the word, but they are true, and they're both what you might call psychological horror. Because really, these are stories about how time slows down when the shit's about to hit the fan, when seconds feel like minutes. So there's plenty of time for a million different things to pass through your mind as you're staring death in the face. So hit pause, grab a drink if you need to, get comfy, settle in, because it's story time with Tony. It was 2011 and I was standing in line with Kyle on Koh San Road to buy 2 tickets for a night bus from Bangkok up to Vientiane. Now, Kyle and I hadn't seen each other for nearly a year, and this was only his 3rd day in Bangkok. Now, I'd crisscrossed Thailand multiple times by that point, and I remember thinking, you know, I must have taken more than 20 of these bloody night buses by now, and statistically, I'm pushing my luck here, because I know they're not safe. And I remember because this was a very clear, lucid thought that ran through my mind as we stood there in line. And I thought, maybe we should get the sleeper train instead. And I didn't because, and God, this sounds pathetic, but you can't cuddle up on a sleeper train. It's single beds on opposite side of the aisle. And as Kyle and I were just getting back together, I thought the night bus would be nicer. We could go upstairs and claim the backseat on the top deck like naughty school kids. So that's what we did. We got our tickets and a few hours later we were on the bus and heading up towards Laos. And it was a nice quiet bus, just about 7 people on the top deck, I think, and a few on the bottom. So the hours passed and it got dark and we fell asleep, and when we woke up I realised we were actually quite close to the border, quite close to our destination. So we decided to have a little snack, a bit of breakfast, and Kyle dug out some crackers and a tub of margarine, and I was just about to dig in when there was this sudden violent lurch forward. And it's true what they say about things going in slow motion, because as my sternum collided with the seat in front of me, I remember in my peripheral vision seeing this tub of margarine flying past and this bright yellow glob floating out like something from a lava lamp, and in a very matter-of-fact way thinking, so this is what a bus crash feels like. And the next thing, we're tilting and veering off to the left, and I'm thinking, okay, we've had the impact, we're just gonna fall on our side. Not great, but hopefully not too bad. But the thing is, we didn't come to a stop. We just kept turning and turning. And I thought, well, this is a bad one. We're turning left, but Kyle's on my right, and if we're gonna die, it would be nice to be holding each other. So we're turning and turning like being in a big tumble dryer, and I'm using all my strength to try and fight gravity and twist to my right to find Kyle. But as I'm reaching for him, the faces of 3 people pop into my head. My mum, my dad, and John. And John was someone very special to me, as I've mentioned in previous videos. And it was at that moment, in the midst of this horrific crash, I realised that we should probably be together. But the timing was all wrong, and here I was about to die, reaching for Kyle simply because he was the nearest person. Yeah, I know. And we were still turning and tumbling around and around, because remember, it's all going in slow motion, and I can see this swirl of grey and blue, which were the colours of the seats. And then I have this flashback to being a baby or a toddler, and I remember how happy I felt, how full of wonder and curiosity I was about the world. And I thought, God, I've wasted so much of my life feeling sad. I must remember this in the next life. Don't waste time being sad. And yes, we're still tumbling and tumbling because it's a really epic bus crash. And at this point I'm thinking, if this doesn't kill me, it is gonna fuck me up good and proper. And that's when I started praying to some God or higher power I didn't even know I believed in. And I prayed for either a quick death or by some miracle to walk away unscathed. So I said, please don't let me be paralysed, please don't let me be brain damaged, and please don't let me be impaled. Obviously not saying it out loud, but thinking it. Yeah, I don't know what it is with impaling. I find it just particularly gruesome. I think I was traumatised by that scene from The Omen when I was a kid. If you've seen that film, you'll know exactly what I mean. And finally, the last thought to pass through my mind was whether our deaths would be reported on the news. Not BBC headlines, obviously, but maybe page 10 of The Guardian or The Telegraph. And that was it. Lights out. I don't know for how long. To me, it felt like a few seconds, but when I came to, the paramedics were already on the scene. And Kyle was calling my name, saying, you're all right, but you're upside down. It's like you're doing a headstand, so come down carefully. And I thought, oh my God, I'm not dead. But what state am I in? Can I move? Are all my bones broken? So I very, very tentatively started to move, and voila, movement with no pain. I somehow managed to get myself upright. The bus was on its side, so the windows were at the top. It's all a bit blurry. I had no shoes on. I remember placing my feet along the edges of the seats, which were sideways, and making my way halfway down the bus to where some paramedics were pulling people through the windows. And these paramedics heave me through the window and point me down the road to the ambulance. And I just remember walking down the road in absolute awe that not only did I survive that crash, but I could still walk. I think I was still half expecting all my bones to collapse. But then I realised my entire body had this weird stinging sensation. And that's when I thought, oh my God, it's the glass that got me. I'm full of shattered glass. So I stopped and looked down and realised I was covered in these huge, fat, orange ants, fire ants, because the bus had landed in a ditch full of fire ants, which was horrible, but a lot better than glass. And the rest is really foggy. I know I was in a weird state of shock that felt like being drunk. I was really giddy and cracking jokes. And I got taken to hospital for a checkup and needed a few stitches in the back of my head. And there was some waiting around for our belongings to be salvaged from the wreckage and returned to us. And we learnt that the bus driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, which unfortunately is quite common on these night buses in Thailand. So he'd fallen asleep and smashed into this house going about 50 or 60 miles an hour, and then we'd careened off to the side and sort of spiraled forward. And we learned there were 15 people on board, including the driver, and somehow, God knows how, no one was killed, no one was seriously injured. There was not a single bone broken on that bus crash. Now, as it turned out, my back was absolutely wrecked. I think all that twisting and turning must have shredded all my muscle fibres in my back and maybe dislodged a few vertebrae. So the next few weeks and months were pretty miserable, especially as Kyle, the narcissist, immediately went back to his old ways, and worse. And it was all my fault, you see, for having a bad back and just not being fun anymore. But that, dear listeners, is an entirely different kind of horror story, one darker and more insidious and perhaps best left to the shadows for now. But you know, I think about that crash quite a lot. I think about how my mind went to a very calm, peaceful place of acceptance when I was facing death and couldn't do anything about it. And I think about standing in that line on the Koh San Road and hearing that voice in my head telling me this is not safe. It was so clear. It was almost like it was someone else's voice whispering in my ear. And I ignored it, and it could have cost me my life. I'm an atheist. I was raised to be an atheist, but it is the kind of thing that does make you wonder if there is some kind of higher power at work. And there have been other experiences as well that have, let's just say, they've made me question things. But again, those are all thoughts and stories for another day. And I think that's quite enough travel terror for one night. So hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the second instalment of Peril and Panic, the Tuk-Tuk of Doom. Meanwhile, take care out there, travellers.